Buenos dias. Always nice to be in Mexico. I'm going to start on a somber note. We are in real-time climate change. When I began looking at this 50 years ago, it was a theory. It's now here in Mexico and in every country of the world. What we're seeing is a dramatic change in the climate of this earth in real time in this generation, and this is the greatest change we've faced in 65 million years in climate, and it's happening in the lifetime of today's babies. This is a pivotal moment for the human race and the planet Earth. All of us, I think, are becoming frightened. If you're a grandparent or a parent, or you're about to have children, we're worried about the future. We see what's happening around us, and we're really scared. In the winter, we see these giant atmospheric storms that pour massive snows into places like Southern California. 15 feet of snow in Southern California in the winter. This has never happened. In the spring, all over the world, we're seeing flooding. Every continent. Whole ecosystems are underwater. They can't plant the food. People are dying. Our fellow creatures are dying. Then in the winter, we get the droughts. No more water in the summer. The droughts in the summer. And then we get heat waves. We literally have parts of the planet where our fellow human beings are trying to live in temperatures ranging between 100 and 120 degrees Fahrenheit. You can't live in that. And we have wildfires across the planet. Today in Washington, D.C., my wife just told me we are on emergency alert this morning. No one is to go outside because we have fires in Canada, and the smoke has come down to D.C., threatening the people's lives. And then in the fall, we get the hurricanes and typhoons. This is never going back to where it was. Let me explain how this all works. There are four primary spheres that make life possible on Earth. The hydrosphere, the waters, and that's the key. We are the watery planet. And then there's the lithosphere, the soil, the plants, the trees, the animals. Then there's the atmosphere, the oxygen. Then there's the biosphere, which encompasses all of them. But the waters are what's crucial. And here's what's happening. What I'm about to explain to you, if you would pass this on, because in 2 minutes, everyone in Mexico would understand what this is all about. We have spewed massive amounts of global warming gases from coal, oil, natural gas into the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. All those molecules in the atmosphere are blocking the sun's heat from getting back off the planet. It blocks it. So here's what's actually happening. For every 1 degree Celsius that the temperature goes up from global warming gases heating up the planet, the atmosphere is actually sucking up 7% more precipitation from the ground. In other words, more evaporation, and the waters go into the clouds more quickly. So we're getting concentrated precipitation in the clouds and more wild, extreme, exponential water events. It's as simple as that. Our scientists are telling us we are currently in the 6th extinction of life on Earth. Doesn't even make the headlines. We're going on as business as usual. This is the most important story we've ever faced. And our scientists are telling us we could lose half the species inhabiting this planet in the lifetime of the people in this room and your babies. We will never see them again. We will never hear them again. These are species of life that have been here for millions of years, well before us. The last climate extinction was 65 million years ago. We need a wake-up call. Because what I'm talking to you about today bypasses political parties and personal interest and all these other things. So I have some hope. And I'll tell you why. There's been a great shift in consciousness as a result of all of this terrible news. We have long believed, our species, that we could dominate nature. If you go back to the book of Genesis, right, in the Garden of Eden, Eve ate that apple from the tree of knowledge, according to the story, and the Lord expelled Adam and Eve from the garden, but he said to Adam, God said, I will give you dominion of all the creation. You will have dominion over all life on the earth, and it's yours. That mandate in various covenants, all the way to the industrial revolution of today, has taken us to where we've gone. But here's what's interesting. Step back for a moment. What we're beginning to realize is this planet is much more powerful and bigger than we ever thought. And our little species is much smaller and less significant in the future of this earth. Do you know what I'm saying? That's a big deal. That's a total change. Because for most of history, we adapted to nature. 10,000 years ago, nice climate, settled down to agriculture, industrial revolution, and we made nature adapt to us. Think of the hubris that we have believed that we could sequester all the waters of the planet for exclusive use of one species. They're rewilding, way beyond our ability to control them at this point. So there's a shift in consciousness. There's another shift. Some of you know about the Gen Z Friday for Future demonstrations. How many have heard of them? Young people in high school going out on the streets. This has happened many, many times. High school students leaving school, millions of them, in 141 countries. And they're calling for a climate emergency. This is not like any protest in history. Our species likes to protest. We're a protesting species. This is really different. This is the first time an entire generation across religious lines, political lines, economic lines, tribal lines have come together, and they actually see themselves as a species, an endangered species. And they see their fellow creatures as endangered species and part of the family. This is a really big change in consciousness. Here's the problem. We don't have a playbook. We don't have a playbook. Because it's not just about fossil fuels into the atmosphere. It's all the way we have perceived our relationships on this planet. It's the way we have related to nature. It's how we've educated our children. It's our forms of governance. It's our economic activity. It's how we approach science. It's even our selfhood. All of these assumptions that we could dominate and control and make the planet adapt to us is what's taken us to an extinction event. The problem is these same values are what we're using to try to address the crisis that we've created. That's the problem. What I wanted to talk to you today is about a new playbook that's already emerging. And everything I'm about to talk to you about today is happening. It's happening here in Mexico. It's happening in my country. It's happening around the world in bits and pieces, but it's happening. And I'm going to tell you the market is there, the technology's there, everything is there, but it isn't scaling because we're still in the old mindset. GDP is slowing all over the world, 20 years. The reason is productivity is slowing all over the world, 20 years. The result is we've got a lot of structural unemployment, and it's the young people. It's not just here in Mexico, it's China, it's the US, it's everywhere. They can't find a steady employment in this planet. And our economists are saying 20 more years of low productivity and slow growth. And let me do the numbers for you. While half the human race, most of us in the industrial world, have done much better since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, right? It's also fair to say that 45% of the human race this afternoon, making $5.40 or less a day, poverty, they're no better off than when we began the Industrial Revolution. Half the human race better, the other half not so. But now the 8 richest people listen to this, the 8 richest individuals, I could put them in this row, 8 people, their combined wealth equals the accumulated wealth of 1/2 the human beings living on the planet this afternoon. The 3 richest people in my country, you know who they are, their accumulated wealth equals the accumulated wealth of 1/2 the citizens in the United States. Tell me there isn't something wrong with all of our process, our political process, our economic process, our cultural, our civic activity. We've got to get this changed. So I'm going to share an anecdote. Back in 2001, Romano Prodi was then president of the European Commission, twice prime minister of Italy. He came to Washington. He sat down with me for an hour. I knew I was in trouble because he held my hand for 1 hour and wouldn't let go. So I knew there was something up. So I said, Jeremy, you've spent 30 years in the U.S. It's not moving forward. We got to address climate change. We got to create a new plan. Come to Europe for the next 25 years. I guarantee you we will lead the world into a post-carbon society. I took him up on it, and I got to tell you, I got a lot of frequent flyer miles. I'm really, really up there. So when we began to discuss this, we stepped back and we asked, how do we address a crisis of this enormity? We wanted to look back in history and understand how the great economic paradigm shifts occur in history. Because if we know how they occur, maybe we can get a roadmap here and a compass for a new direction. So when we look back at history, and this isn't in the textbooks, it's in my books, but it isn't in the textbooks yet, what we found is that there have been a 6 or so great economic changes in history. They all share the same common denominator. It's really fascinating that at a moment of time, and it's usually serendipity, 4 different technology revolutions start to emerge and they begin to converge at given moments in history to create a new infrastructure that fundamentally changes the way we human beings manage our lives. And what are those 4 technologies? Number 1, new communication revolutions to bring more people together, right? Number 2, new sources of energy to bring more people together. Number 3, new modes of mobility and logistics to bring more people together. Number 4, new ways of relating to the waters to bring more people together. When that happens, large numbers of people can come together in more complex civilizations for day-to-day life. I'll give you 2 examples. First Industrial Revolution, Britain. Second Industrial Revolution, the US. Brits, 19th century. The Communication Revolution, steam power printing, no more manual print presses. Steam power printing. Then they laid out a telegraph system in the last half of the century, instant communication. The energy regime, Europe had denuded its forests, no more trees. They went to coal, underground, new energy. The mobility revolution, the railroads, locomotives, national transport. The water revolution, they put in the first purification for water systems and sewer systems. This changed everything. They went to urban life with railroads, big dense urban life, national markets, right? Nation-state governance, shareholding companies, because it was so expensive you needed everybody to finance it. Second Industrial Revolution, the US, 20th century. The communication revolution, the telephone, across the continent, instant communication. The energy revolution, as you know, south of the border here, we hit oil in Texas. We didn't rely on coal totally. The mobility revolution, Henry Ford put everybody in that internal combustion automobile. The water revolution, hydroelectric power dams. The second industrial revolution took us from urban to rural and urban to suburban environments with the roads and automobiles. It took us from national markets to globalization. It took us to global governing institutions, the IMF, the OECD, the World Bank, right? Now we know when that second industrial revolution peaked. We all know. July 2008, you remember that month, folks? Oil hit $147 a barrel. and the entire global economy shut down. That was the beginning of the great earthquake and the end, long end, of the industrial-based fossil fuel civilization. The collapse of the financial market with that stupid subprime mortgage, that was just an aftershock 60 days later. Why the earthquake? Everything depends on fossil fuels. It's not just powering our vehicle or heating our homes. Our food additives and preservatives, fossil fuels. Our cosmetics, fossil fuels. Our pharmaceutical products, fossil fuels. Our construction materials, fossil fuels. Our synthetic clothing, fossil fuels. It's endless, so when oil goes over 80 a barrel, watch all the other prices go up. Right now, the last fossil fuel war is being fought, Russia and Ukraine. Prices have gone up, inflation's gone up for everything else. It's simple. It's never discussed in the media. We know this in the business community. So I'll share a second anecdote. When Angela Merkel became Chancellor of Germany, she asked me to come to Berlin in the first couple of weeks of her new government to address the question of how to move Germany forward. New employment, new jobs, etc. When I got to Berlin, I said, Madam Chancellor, the first thing I said to her is, Madam Chancellor, how do you move the German economy forward when your businesses are plugged in to a second industrial revolution infrastructure of centralized communication, fossil fuel nuclear energy power, internal combustion transport, and hydroelectric power dams and the water's running out of the rivers, and a suburban building stock that now cannot withstand climate events, and an urban stock. Because the entire infrastructure we have here in this room, around Mexico and around the world, and all the buildings and all the infrastructure and all of that, it's stranded. It cannot deal with climate change. It has to be all remade in 2 generations. I'll share one more thought here. So I taught at the Wharton School for a long, long time, 21 years in the advanced management program and executive program. We brought in CEOs from around the world, give them 5 weeks of training. So the first day I would say to them, go to your dorm tonight and think of the worst crisis that could face your company while you're the president of the company. Come back and report to the group. They come back the next day. They don't tell everything because their competitors are in the room too, right? Then I say to them, tomorrow night, go back to your dorm and think about that worst crisis that could happen to your company, and then think about how that's your greatest opportunity. Crisis creates opportunity. This is the greatest crisis in history. We have to rethink the entire transformation of the earth in 2 generations if we're going to make it. So I said to the Chancellor, you can have market reform, labor reform, fiscal reform. Sure, you can get a lot of startup companies, you know. It won't make a damn bit of difference if they're plugged into a second industrial revolution infrastructure that's now in its sunset. You can't get any more out of that infrastructure. So on that day, we discussed a 3rd industrial revolution. And I should say, people talk about the 4th industrial revolution. It's all a 3rd industrial revolution. AI, robotics, it's all part of a digital, smart technology revolution. It all goes together. It's about digital, big data, analytics. So here's what this 3rd industrial revolution is all about. The communication revolutions, the internet, everyone's here connected. We have 4.5 billion people connected. And in your hand, hopefully it's in your pocket now, there is a cell phone that has more computing power than sent our astronauts to the moon. That's distributed power potential. 4.5 billion people, not a few companies. And now that communication internet is converging with a second internet, an energy internet. Millions of people now are generating their own solar and wind. Farmers, ranchers, small businesses, homeowners, electric utilities. They're all starting to generate solar and wind. Because in 2019, the levelized cost of solar and wind became the cheapest energy in the world. Way cheaper than nuclear, way cheaper than oil, way cheaper than coal, and cheaper than natural gas. Which begs the question, why are we still building coal-fired and gas-fired power plants when they will never amortize out and they're more expensive than solar and wind which is distributed. That's not a good market. That's something else. That has to do with lots of other things, all right? So what we understood here was that the communication internet converges with the energy internet. Millions of people began to generate their own solar and wind. And what they're not using, they're storing in batteries and fuel cells, mostly in batteries now, but fuel cells. And then they're sharing it up on an electricity internet across time zones, using big data, analytics, and algorithms to share electricity, solar and wind, just like we share communications. And those time zones are going to go across the continent in the next decade. We're already scaling in the US, China, and Europe. And they're going to go across the ocean in the next 20 years, underwater cable, we're already scaling, beginning. We're going to have a global energy internet where if the sun is shining in Mexico, you generate that solar and wind, and then all of you in this room could generate it, and then you put it up on the energy internet, and you share it with a nighttime zone in Asia. When the wind's blowing in Asia, they can take that electricity and share it with a daytime zone in Europe. Everything I'm telling you is beginning in the major industries that are in our global team and are working on this in those places. Europe, China, and just beginning with the Build Back Better plan we did for Senate Majority Leader Schumer. So these two internets are now converging with a third internet, mobility and logistics internet. What's happened here is electric vehicles are here, fuel cell transport's coming. They are powered by solar and wind from the electricity internet. They're increasingly semi-autonomous, meaning that they're going to use big data and analytics to manage semi-autonomous transport, just like we use big data and analytics for sharing energy and communication. Those three internets are converging with the youngest internet, just starting. It's the water internet. Pretty important here, from Mexico to Baja to California to the Colorado River, right? So what we're realizing here, we're not running out of water. Sometimes do you wonder why we have massive floods and then we have droughts and then we say we're running out of water? No. The amount of water on this planet right now, this afternoon, it's been the same amount of water since the planet began. The molecules do not disappear, but they do change the way they operate, okay? So what's happened here is that the water is still there, but it's not coming at the right time. For the last 10,000 years, we had a nice climate. Everything was predictable. There would be snow in the winter. It would melt about the right time to make water for the spring, for the crops. And then in the summer, we wouldn't need it again. That's all changed. Now the snow smelts in November or December. You have floods when you're trying to graze your crops, right? And then you have droughts in the summer. So the water internet, this has just started. We're going to have millions and millions of water microgrids, just like we now have electricity microgrids. When I started this 20 years ago, none. We have lots of them. We're planning for 78 million microgrids in homes, offices, and businesses in the US in the next 15 years. So you'll be able to harvest the water when it comes on your rooftops, in your businesses. There'll be underground cisterns, very high tech. And then when you need them, there'll be a digitized water internet that can distribute that water in the time of the year you need it. This is beginning to scale. All of these changes come with one other change. It's called the Internet of Things. We are creating a brain and a nervous system for the planet. It's never really talked about. The brain is Galileo, GPS, all of these satellites. The nervous system are billions of sensors. I don't know if you know this, but we're putting sensors across the entire wild environment of the planet so we can monitor wildlife, find out what's going on with the hydrosphere, the lithosphere, the atmosphere, day to day. It's good. So we can try to figure out how to adapt to the climate. We have sensors in the agricultural fields. They're monitoring the soil salinity, the water. Factories are using IoT, Internet of Things. So are smart homes. Your homes probably has it, your businesses. And what this IoT is a brain and a nervous system, but it's totally distributed. Now, let me share another thought. These infrastructure revolutions, governments don't actually create the technology for the infrastructure and how it works. The infrastructure technology determines the kind of governance. Economies don't actually create the economic opportunities. The new technology tells us what the opportunities are. So what I'm saying is infrastructure changes the way we organize communication, energy, mobility, and built environment, and it tells you the kinds of new governance that could go with that infrastructure. All right? So the first industrial revolution and second industrial revolution infrastructure were centralized, vertically integrated, top down. Why? Fossil fuels are really expensive to explore, extract, and purify. So the industries that controlled it were the big early Standard Oil, the fossil fuel industries, right? But then every other industry that was based on a fossil fuel infrastructure had to vertically integrate, right? So here's what you end up with. This is the reality. I know, because I work with the business community. They're in my group. We've got 500 global companies, Fortune 500, all right? Those companies represent 1/3 of the GDP of the world. That's just 500 institutions. You know how many employees they have? 65 million employees out of a workforce of 3.5 billion people, and they're 1/3 of the global GDP. No, it wasn't something done in a way that there was meanness. It's just the way the infrastructure operated. Now, this third industrial revolution infrastructure, it's true, the first big companies, Dell, Microsoft, Facebook, and Google, right? They vertically integrated, right? Big, huge companies, right? I'm going to tell you here, you'll be around to see this, they will not be here in 30 or 40 years from now in their present guise. The reason why is here. Berners-Lee, who created the World Wide Web, he's going to get the last laugh. He said, I want to build a web for all of us so that everyone on the periphery can directly relate to each other without a referee at the center. Here's what's happening. The Internet of Things, we're creating so much information, so much data. These big, giant, global data centers, they are too stodgy. They can't handle the data. So what's happening is something new called edge data centers. How many here have heard of edge data centers? Raise your hands. How many have heard of edge data centers? Very few. There are thousands of them now. There'll be millions in 10 years from now. So here's what they're finding. It's called the latency factor. If you have an autonomous vehicle about to crash, and you send that data to one of those big centralized data centers, it's too slow. The crash happens. So these edge data centers will be in your homes, your offices, factories, the streets. It's already starting. And so you'll be able, and locally, to be able to be on time to deal with that crash. We're seeing a completely new infrastructure that favors distributed rather than centralized. It favors smart, medium-sized, small and medium-sized enterprises, high-tech, over big, stodgy global companies. It favors, if you will, glocalization over globalization. I'm going to give you an example. Some of you know, how many know what 3D printing is? Fabrication printing, 3D printing. All right. So this is a new form of manufacturing. It's called additive manufacturing. In subtractive manufacturing, you build a building, you use bricks, you use cement, you use plastic, but you have to get rid of a lot of it to get to the final product. So it's wasted. With 3D printing, I'll give you an example. An architect in Italy recently, he took clay, which is how buildings were built for thousands of years, and that became his feedstock. Then he developed software, and that software tells the clay how to pour out an entire building, and you can do it in 24 hours, 48 hours, much cheaper, no waste, climate resilient. They're building out bridges, and they're building out wind turbine bases, and all sorts of things with 3D printing. The UAE, United Arab Republic, just announced that 25% of all their buildings will be 3D printed by 2030. Saudi Arabia just announced $500 billion to move to the new technology. But in a provider-user network, I'll show you how globalization works. Let's say that you're an architect here in Mexico, an architect. You come up with a plan to use soil or some other feed base to develop a commercial building, and then instead of a seller-buyer market, you can have a provider-user network, and you can send the instructions for that building to a developer in the Philippines. No cost on the internet. And then that developer builds out buildings, and you get a fee for every building, a license. This is glocalization. All of the across-ocean air traffic, handful of superpowers. This is more distributed. This will prevail because the market is there. That's the one interesting thing about it. It's the power of the market, but it might not prevail in time. That's the problem. We're running out of time. Now, I want to share with you something totally different, but totally related. It isn't just about the technology and the market. We need to change the way we think of nature, science, the way we educate ourselves, what a human being is. I'm going to tell you about a project that you will never forget the rest of your life after you leave this room. You'll never forget what I'm about to tell you. The National Institutes of Health, the greatest scientific body in the world, in Washington, D.C., 4 blocks from my office. They have launched a new project. It's called the Human Microbiome Project. This is one of the great revolutionary changes in history, like Darwin's evolution. And here's what they are doing. They are now telling everybody in this room, all of us, that each of us is actually an ecosystem, not a metaphor. Every one of us in this room is an actual ecosystem. They've discovered a new ecosystem, and that is we are semi-permeable membrane. We are taking in the molecules from the hydrosphere in our cells and our organs. That's 60% of our body. Then those molecules go somewhere else. They don't disappear. We're taking in the elements from the lithosphere. The phosphorus in my teeth, see this one here, phosphorus, that came from a mountain. The mountain was degraded by the waters, like Grand Canyon, and then the mountain became sediment. The elements in the sediment make up the soil. The plants take up the elements, and those elements make life possible in every body. Then they go somewhere else. They don't disappear. A lot of us think, well, I'm an autonomous being. Once I'm mature, I've got puberty, my skeleton will be here the rest of my life. My bones, right? This is going to surprise you. The human skeleton is replaced every 10 years. Total. The liver, it's replaced every year. The stomach cells every month. We are a semi-permeable membrane, and here's what's really weird and really great. The scientists are telling us that we are not alone in our body. There are millions of creatures in our body that we are just understanding that they make a human being possible. They're not human. We have archaea, fungi, protea, bacteria, and viruses, millions of them. It turns out that only 44% of the cells in a human being are human. Less than half. The rest belong to these other creatures, and we have no idea how they organize us. They organize us. And it turns out we have 20,000 genes, human genes. There are millions of other genes in our body. We don't know how they organize us. This is the National Institutes of Health. Why is this so promising? My God, it's hopeful. To grow up to believe that each of us is individual. We're unique. But we are part of a larger plan. We have an organic planet that's alive. The hydrosphere, the lithosphere, the atmosphere, the biosphere, it's alive, it's animated, it's changing moment to moment. And our little species is part of this great experiment in the universe. And instead of being afraid, instead of thinking of nature as the enemy, scared to death, instead of going into the metaverse where we're sitting there on a screen, hoveled in the metaverse with our little emoticons and our little creatures, that's sophomoric. We will not survive that. I'm not opposed to big data and analytics. We use them in everything I just told you. But to know that we're part of nature and that we can adapt to nature rather than forcing nature to adapt to us, that's a new approach to science. Francis Bacon, the founder of modern science, Remember him? He said, man was not made for nature. Nature was made for man. And he said, he called the earth a common little harlot. He was a pretty big misogynist, a common harlot, and we will shake her to her foundation. That's the founder of modern science. He said, we will take the planet and we will be an observer detached, and with rational thought, we'll find the secrets of nature and distract them and take them and sequester them. Then we wonder why we're in an extinction event. There is a new science emerging here in Mexico at your universities and all over the world. It's exciting. It's interdisciplinary. It's called complex, adaptive, social ecological systems modeling. Across disciplines, we are learning a new science. Rather than trying to force nature to adapt to us, this new science allows us to respond, adapt and respond to nature. I'll give you an example of what this means in the real world. Everybody here believes in efficiency, right? Guess what? That's a brand new idea as a temporal idea. We always thought every creature tries to be efficient. No. For all of history, every species on this planet has biological clocks. And everybody here today, you have clocks in your cells, biological clocks in your organs, your tissues. Moment to moment, they are adapting and responding to the rotation of the earth every day and our crossing of the sun every year. That's the way it's always been. That's the time value of the planet. 10,000 years ago, the last ice age receded. Nice climate called the Holocene. No more nomadic foraging and hunting. Settled down to agriculture. Created great hydraulic civilizations all the way to the Industrial Revolution. We forced nature to adapt to us. And here's where efficiency came in. Here's what efficiency is. It's a made-up value. We extract greater volumes of the Earth's four spheres. We extract greater volumes of the hydrosphere, the waters, the lithosphere, the soil, the plants and animals, the atmosphere, the oxygen, and the biosphere, and we extract greater volumes at higher speeds in shorter time intervals. That's efficiency. To optimize one species, ours. Our little species is less than 1% of the biomass on this earth. We're using 24% of the photosynthesis, and in 20 years, 44%. It's not viable. The planet does not need us, but we need the planet, for sure. So what we're learning here is a new vocabulary, a new narrative. All of us are in kindergarten, but there's hope here. What I'm talking to you about is happening around the world. And where's the money for this? Here's the issue. $11 trillion have flooded out of fossil fuel industries. $11 trillion. It's a stranded asset. The exploration rights will never be amortized. The pipelines will never be amortized. The gas-fired power plants will never be amortized over 30 years. It's on and on. $11 trillion is left in the last few years, led by pension funds, insurance funds. And those are the two big assets. Pension funds are $40 trillion. Karl Marx would never have understood pension funds. The workers are actually the capitalists. They now have to control their money. And so the pension funds don't want their employees to be stranded. Public employees, private employees. The insurance funds don't want to have to pay for all the climate damage. So every week I'm on the phone. Our global team involves all the major Fortune 500 companies. We have a lot of them in our team. I'm on the phone or on a Zoom with the pension funds, the insurance, the banking industry, and the presidents are saying to me, my God, where are the projects? We've got all this money. Should we just hold it in Federal Reserve notes? It's not scaling. Because when you go to a mayor in many of these 11,000 cities that have signed up for the Paris Climate Agreement, that mayor will show you her or his 10 LEED buildings, 5 electric buses, and bike paths. They're all little pilots that they can get a news hit on. It's not scaling. So all of the financial community is saying, give us scaled projects across regions because the money is there. But what's happening is you have people in political power in a lot of places old codes, old regulations, old standards, and old political interests and business interests. That's not to say that we shouldn't make a careful transition. We've got to make sure we take care of these industries. In Germany, we've put billions and billions of euros into helping the fossil fuel industry make an exit over the next 25 or 30 years into the new technologies. In Haute-France, the industrial region of France, the largest industrial region, my team worked there for 10, 12 years. And they trained the granddaughters and grandsons of coal workers to retrofit buildings and put in solar and wind, and they're making more money. But you have to be able to make sure the old industries get what they need to transition out. This is all common sense. So, two things I want to end up with. One is, can we make it? And two, is there enough time? I'm going to share with you a really hopeful story. The Smithsonian institutions, Mexico has the best museums in the world, for sure. But our Smithsonian institutions in the United States, they did a study recently. It is amazing. They went back in history and they asked the question, how did our species survive? When you look at our species, two little spindly legs, no fur, no strength, no physical. How the hell did this little species survive? Good question to ask, right? The old story you and I grew up on was the new climate emerged 10,000 years ago. Nice climate, agriculture, pastoralization, hydraulic civilizations, industrial age, very predictable weather, right? And so the idea was our hominid ancestors, 800,000 years ago, then our Neanderthal ancestors, and many of you have taken your blood test, right, your DNA test. My wife has lots of Neanderthal genes. I don't know if you do. So then we have our species, Homo sapien, 200,000 years ago. How did we do this? Well, the old story, we got out of the trees, we went into the savannas, we crossed the oceans, and we settled the world. And then they went back in the record and they said, oh my God, we got it wrong. When they looked at the geological record, what they found in the last 800,000 years of hominid evolution, they were the most extreme changes in climate in most of history. Did you hear what I just said? The most extreme changes in climate in much of history. What happened 800,000 years ago is the planet's orbit shifts from time to time. Sometimes a little closer to the sun, sometimes a little further away from the sun. Beginning 800,000 years ago, there was a shift in the orbit. So they had a cycle they noticed for 800,000 years. 100,000 years, ice age, 10,000 years warming. 100,000 years ice age, 10,000 years warming. 100,000 years ice age, 10,000 years warming. This has gone on for 800,000 years till 10,000 years ago. So the Smithsonian scientists said, how the hell did this little creature, this species, make it? And here's what they found out. And this is so promising. We're probably the most adaptive species that's ever come onto this planet. But for 250,000 years or 800,000 years, we adapted to nature. The last 10,000 years, we decided nature had to adapt to us. We lost our way. And so what they're saying is, why are we so adaptive? The viruses may be more adaptive, but we're there for the mammalian species. Here's why. Big brain. Language. The ability to collect knowledge and share it for generation after generation. We build a bank of knowledge. We have these hands, and with a thumb, opposable thumb, that allows us to make technologies. No other creature has that agility, right? We have neurons we've discovered for empathy in our neural circuitry. It's not up here. Those mirror neurons are throughout our neural circuitry, allowing us to experience another, a human or an animal, their grief, their joy, like we're feeling it, totally in here, which means we cooperate. We can kill each other, but our normal physiology is to cooperate. So they said it's these adaptive skills that allow us, but here's what we have to do. We have to bring in the new scientific technology. We have to have the new understanding that we are each an ecosystem. We have to begin to introduce our young people began to introduce the idea that we are a species among species. We have to be able to realize that the new technologies allow us to adapt to nature rather than the technology of nature, rather than nature adapting to us. This is not rocket science. What I'm saying to you this afternoon is embarrassingly simple. A high school junior and senior could see this. When we wrote the books, the new one, I usually don't mention, The Age of Resilience, it can be read by a high school junior. It's sophisticated. But we just got to begin to think of this new narrative. So what I would say to you, all of you that are in political parties here, you're in the business community, you're in the labor union movement, you're in agriculture, you're in AI, we have to cross the political boundaries. We have to move across from center right, center left, center center, and begin to organize together. And I'm going to give you one last thought on this. What we realized in Europe and China, and now in the US, is climate change doesn't give a crap about political boundaries. When a flood hits and a drought and a wildfire and a hurricane, it crosses sovereign nation boundaries. So we have to introduce a new kind of governance. We don't give up national governments, they're here, or regions, or municipalities. We have to extend them one more level. It's called bioregional governance. And that means that all of us have to have a second agenda, which is to join together across common ecosystems to manage climate preparation, restoration, and resilience and recovery. Now, here's the one place America's ahead. I don't know if you know this. We have 2 bioregional governments. They're huge. If they were a government, they'd be the 4th or 5th largest government in the world in terms of the economy. One is Cascadia. The Northwest Pacific states, Washington, Oregon, Montana, Idaho, and the Canadian provinces, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, for 25 years, they are in a common bioregional governance in which they legislate, they direct economic activity, employment, new jobs. Amazing. The second one is the Great Lakes Laurentian bioregion. 25 years, the 8 US states, the 2 Canadian provinces, they still have their state sovereignty, their national sovereignty, but they work together because they realize their ecosystem is their future. And by the way, those Great Lakes, that's 20% of all the fresh water still available on Earth. 20%. 80% of the water available in the US. That's extraordinary. And here's another stat. In the last 20 years, the amount of water available per capita on this planet has gone in half. We have 8 billion people, and they have half as much water per person as we had 20 years ago. Did you hear that? So we have to begin now to move from the age of progress, and as we say in the new book, the age of resilience. And here, as you move forward in Mexico, it's essential that we do this. For example, the electricity internet. Europe is going to join Asia on a super grid, for sure, in the next 30 years. We need the Americas on an energy internet from all the way up to Canada to Chile, and Mexico will be the bridge between North America, Central and South America. So we can share our solar, our wind, our communication, our energy, our mobility, our logistics. This can be done. We're sitting here, all our political parties and all our governments, and they're fighting each other in a zero-sum game because everybody's frightened and trying to hold on to less and less. We have to cross the political aisle and bring center right, center left, everyone together for biosphere politics, not geopolitics, for bioregional approaches to governance. I hope it'll be done. I'm an old man. I won't be here. But you folks are going to be here. This is on your watch, and your children, and your grandchildren. Last thought. Can we do this in time? All right. I'm going to use the US. We built out the whole first industrial revolution in the 19th century in 30 years. After the Civil War, 1865, the whole economy was in shambles. People killing each other in the war. The economy dead. What did we do? We built out an entire continental railway system across the entire continent. All right? Transport. We put in a communication grid called the telegraph across the entire continent. The building stock. We ceded 10% of the public land to immigrants and gave them title so they could set up cities across the railroad depots. Then we put in public universities. We gave them land. And so those public universities could train the workforce. 30 years. Second Industrial Revolution, 20th century. We did it in 25 years in the urban areas, not the rural areas. We put out millions of automobiles. We laid out road systems. We put in electricity lines across the urban areas. And we put in telephone systems. And we put in gas pipelines. We did that in 25 years. The rural areas took another 15 or 20. Our global team of industries and companies, they're some of the ones you know. We believe, and when we did this plan for Senate Majority Leader Charles Schumer, it's a $17 trillion plan. Not all of it got into the final plan, but it's open source. I'll send it to all of you. And what we believe can happen in terms of the market and the technology, this can be done in 20 years at a preliminary infrastructure and another 20 years to optimize. This means hundreds of thousands of new businesses, mainly SMEs. This means millions of jobs. Robots and AI do not put solar on the roof and retrofit buildings. Robots and AI do not steward ecosystems. It goes on and on and on. It's silly. There's a role for AI, but it can't do this kind of work that requires millions of tech skills and semi-skilled and professional skills. Mexico has the expertise. You have the universities. You have great companies. And you have a long tradition of working together at times. So my hope is be the bridge between North, Central, and South America. I'm convinced that we are on the path. I'm working with them, Europe and Asia and the Mediterranean, one continent, trade zone. We have to do that from the Arctic to all the way to the end of Chile. So when you go forward in your political parties, reach across the aisle. Say, let's not talk about politics here. Let's talk about what we can all do together so that we all are rewarded and so that our children and grandchildren can live in a world that has hope. Last thought, you know what our astronauts keep telling us when they come back? There's nothing out there. It's kind of creepy. It's dark. And when they come toward the Earth, they see the blue marble, this watery planet. They say, my God, this experiment is incredible. We don't really understand life. We're trying to figure it out. But I know every one of us in the room, we cherish being alive, to flourish, to have that one moment. And you know, our fellow creatures need that moment too. They need that one moment. So what I'm hoping is, from today forward, let's start a new story here, a new narrative. And let's fill it in, because Mexico can be a big lead across the Americas and hopefully bring us up to speed like we're starting to do in Europe and Asia. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Rifkin. It was a truly eye-opening talk. If you agree with me, I'm here. Mr. Rifkin?
Oh, there's questions.
Yes.
Questions.
Yes, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Excuse me.
We're going to do some questions, if you're okay with it. So,
I sure am.
Las personas que tengan alguna pregunta pueden levantar la mano y les cederemos el micrófono.
Hi, good afternoon. First of all, welcome to Mexico. My name is Santi Montemayor. I'm from Cancun. I'm an architect, so this topic is my passion, and it's really an important topic for our political party. I have a specific question to make to you. You have spoken about climate change, of course, in relation to economic transition. Can you share a little bit more about how these two topics are so linked and so connected, please?
How the transition's connected to architecture?
No. The economic transition to climate change.
Oh, for climate change.
Thank you.
Well, the actual transition, this infrastructure, we now have the plan. I mean, the idea of bringing together the communication internet, the energy internet, the mobility internet, the water internet, the internet of things, the building stock, in order to address climate change, and all the things that go with it. That plan's there. If you get a chance to read The Third Industrial Revolution, that book, or The Age of Resilience, that book, we lay out a lot of that, of what's actually happening on the ground. And the transition is going to require basically an attitude shift. The money is there, and the market's there for this, and the technology is ready. I think the biggest troubling block really is really, I got to tell you, is its old-fashioned political interest that don't have the bigger picture. And this is true across right, center, left. I don't care where it is, all right? We need a younger generation of architects and engineers and farmers and teachers who are growing up in a different world. The 20-year-olds, the 30-year-olds, they're coming of age. They think this way. And that's not to mean that we don't have a debt to our grandparents and other generations. They did the best they could. They didn't see climate coming. None of us did. So I think the transition's more up here. Because the technology, an architect, the technology's there. Adrian Smith, Gordon Gill, they're in our group. All right, they're doing the new capital of Egypt. We've worked with Gordon for years and years. We know how to do it. You know how to do it. And it's not just architects. The engineers in this room know how to do it. All right? The folks that are dealing with AI know how to do it. Right? It goes on and on. So the way we've done it in the past, I'll give you an example. Haute-France, the industrial region of France, 10% of the population. And this is a good story to share with you. About in 2010, the president of the region said, will you do a plan for our region? I said, absolutely not. I will not do a plan. We will not do a plan. Forget it. He said, why? I said, because it'll end up being a pilot project and some minister will have a press release and that'll be it. And I said, however, if you want to go back to the entire industrial region and get every mayor, every governor, every chamber of commerce, every university, every high school, and show me the list, they do it, not us. And they never come back. This guy came back, and he actually lined up the entire region. And so we had thousands and thousands and thousands of people. You can see this in the articles. I'll send you the articles. They have created new tech parks, new jobs, new businesses. They did it. What we can do is help, but it took an entire industrial region to roll up their sleeves, and they created over 15 years a completely new plan. It's not unusual. Any region can do that. And what happened was when he then lost the next election, he was a socialist. He lost it to a Republican, center-right. So I had breakfast with a guy, and he said, well, Jeremy, I guess you want to know what I'm going to do. I said, what? He said, this is so good. This goes beyond political boundaries. I've invited the guy I defeated to come with me, and we're going to do this together. It takes a region to build this. It's not a consulting agency that comes in and builds this. The plan, the infrastructure changes and is customized to each region. We've worked with other regions all over the world. They have to do it. So you have all these regions in Mexico, and they all have their unique talents. The regions need to cooperate and create their own roadmaps based on the larger transformation that we know can happen. The national government has to be the orchestrator in saying, look, we encourage you, we'll work with you, we'll create the new codes and new standards and new regulations, but we have to have the regions come and do this so that we do this together. Then there's no backing. People don't back off and compete with each other and argue with each other because it becomes their project. If you see these regional plans, and we'll share them, they're open source, they did this. So therefore, they decided among themselves across all political lines and all the other lines how to do this over a period of years. They broke down the old barriers of geopolitics. They created the new biosphere politics. They realized that there's a more important mission here.
Hello, Jeremy. My name is Estefania Mercado. I work in the local Congress of Quintana Roo. My question is focused on the future generations of politicians, such as ideals, dreams, and good intentions of a young person who wants to change their community, their city, and their states. We have seen how the ecological and environmental agenda has been a great motivator for young people to define elections, as in the case of Chile with Boric. What is the way for the young leaders who aspire to govern and legislate this country you think they should commit with the environmental agenda? Thank you.
You know, there's practice, theory, theory, practice. When I first became an activist, I had no idea what I was doing, basically. And in the 1960s, I began to realize that you have to have each of us have practical experience in terms of what's going on in the communities we care about. But then we also have to go back and do our homework and ask, what are the kinds of ideas, philosophical, anthropological, technical, economic, that have led us to the problems we have? And then we go back with that knowledge, and it helps us in terms of how we organize our day-to-day activity. Then we go back and forth and back and forth. So you want to bring the universities in. You want to bring the think tanks in. You want to bring in the high schools in. You want to be able to have a movement that's not just activism in the street. And what I would say is that the protests right now of the Gen Zs is only about that. It's going to go nowhere. It's not about convincing those in power. It's about becoming part of that political establishment and working with those that are there now, because they have wisdom, they have experience. They may be in the wrong theater that we want to go, but they have wisdom and experience, these political leaders. So again, we have to cooperate across political lines. We really have to do that. If we can do this in places like Haute-de-France or Luxembourg or the 23 cities, Rotterdam, The Hague, Rome, you can do this. We got to have that happen. And then cross the border and work with folks in America. Look at Texas. How did that happen? Would that surprise you? Wind. They went to wind because they all worked together and they saw it as a better opportunity. And then it spread across America. It's interesting to note that 6 of the largest 10 wind states are all Republican red states. 5 of the 10 large solar states are all Republican states. All of the new industries that I'm talking about are moving to the south and the west, which are Republican states. So General Motors just announced a deal with Tennessee and Kentucky, are Republican states. They're putting their electric 150 trucks, the second biggest consumer item after iPhones, in those red states. 11,000 jobs, and those 2 state legislators gave them billions of dollars of write-offs. And what happens is once you get these new industries in, people start to say, wow, wind is kind of cool. I like the solar. I like that electric fuel truck. It's cheaper and it runs easier, you know? There's nothing like actually implementing something, and then you see that it's of worth. This can happen.
Good afternoon, Mr. Rifkin. Do you mind if I take, can I speak without?
Yeah, a little louder.
Yeah. Thank you very much for coming to Mexico. Thank you very much for your words. My name is Petaco. I'm a lawyer. And I have a question, but during your presentation, I think I have more questions and awareness. Mr. Rifkin, your theory of the third industrial revolution has had a significant impact on our understanding and now in our awareness of the modern economy. How do you see this revolution acting as a driver towards transitioning to a greener and inclusive future?
Well, basically, just my conversation this afternoon covers a lot of this. If you want more detail, take the Spanish edition of this book, The Age of Resilience, is out right now.
I have it already.
Then it's the best I could do. All I did is put together what everyone's doing in a story, all right? And took about 9 years. But it's basically what's the experience of this moving forward. I think that's the one you should read. It's the Spanish edition or the English edition, either one. Age of Resilience. All right?
I have it already. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you for coming to Mexico.
Thank you for inviting me. I should say my family has ties with Mexico. My mother was born in 1911 in El Paso, Texas, and my family settled in New Mexico, had the first general store there in New Mexico. And we grew up with both the Mexican tradition and food and culture and everything else, along with the U.S. tradition. So our family tree goes back quite a while. So it's always a pleasure to come down here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rifkin.
Thank
we
you,
would
everybody.
like to offer you a token of our appreciation, so we invite Roberto Rubio to give it to you.
Bienvenido, amigo. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.